coming to yet another MWA seminar. This is technically our fifth of the fall 2022, spring 2023 season, but don't fret, we have some summer sessions coming up for you guys and more coming up. We're planning a great seminar, series for you guys for fall of 2023, spring of 2024. But as far as tonight goes, we're excited to hear from Ilana, Judah, and Incho, and I'll start with an introduction of Ilana. But before I do so, if we could just ask that you guys all mute yourselves and maybe turn on your cameras. If not now, certainly when we get to the question and answer portion of the event. But for those of you that haven't been here before, we'll start with both presenters and we'll hold our questions to the end. But while presentations are going on, please feel free to include your questions in the chat, and we'll certainly get to them by the question and answer portion of the evening. So I will start with an introduction of Ilana Judah, who is currently the associate principal at Arup, a global collective of designers, engineering, and sustainability consultants, advisors, and experts dedicated to sustainable development. Ilana is currently serving as Arup's East Resilience Leader and Climate and Sustainability Discipline Team Leader, taking an integrative systems thinking-based yet pragmatic approach to translating climate objectives into viable solutions. Ilana was previously co-chair of AIA NY COTE and currently serves on the board of the AIA NY. She also previously served on the AIA's National Resilience and Adaptation Advisory Group, multiple New York City sustainability task forces, and Mayor Bloomberg under Mayor Bloomberg and de Blasio, and is a board member of NY Passive House. Prior to Arup, Ilana was principal director of sustainability at FX Collaborative in New York, and she's doing a bit less of architecture these days, less buildings and more infrastructure. She was just sharing with us. We'd love to hear more from Ilana about both her career and her personal, and without further ado, we'll jump right into your presentation.
Great, thanks so much, Angelique. So the theme of my presentation today is really linking the relationship of it's about purpose-driven leadership. So I am going to talk a little bit about my personal journey of how I grew up and how that translated into architecture and how that all kind of came together in terms of what I'm doing now. As Angelique mentioned, I'm no longer practicing traditional architecture. I've gone through a few iterations in my career. And so sort of my theme is about leadership and how we as architects can sort of look at our purpose and our values and help that, use that to inform how we can lead and how we can influence and how we can affect change. So it's really, I just wanted to tell my story and happy to share, some more nuances and questions around that. So I have some slides, but they're just really sort of background. So I'll just start by sharing my screen. Just a second. If you bear with me, and there we go. So let's see if I can do full screen here. All right. Hopefully this works. Yes. So I guess I'll start by saying that, this is for those of you who know Yogi Berra, famous sort of baseball person, who had these sort of funny quotes that didn't always make complete sense, but in some ways do. The sort of, when I started my career, I knew I wanted to be an architect, but I think I came across some points where, when I was trying to get into more specifics, like what do I want to do in architecture? How do I want to leverage my career? I didn't always know where I was going. And so this is kind of the story of how I started to, the point at which I knew where I was going and sort of really being very deliberate about the actions I took in my career in order to kind of, align with my values and my direction. So in terms of my values, I grew up in this beautiful city. I was going to ask someone to guess what it was, but we've kind of given it away already. So I grew up in this wonderful marriage of, you know, a dense urban environment that was walkable with public transportation, with a beautiful small mountain in the middle. I don't know if I'd call it a mountain, but this marriage of urban and nature was very much part of my upbringing, and ended up kind of culminating in my architecture thesis of like trying to bring those two things together. And I grew up in an environmentalist family, so I spent a lot of time on that mountain. I was an avid reader, and my family were a kind of a weird family in the sense that my parents were deep environmentalists, and in an era when that wasn't really a thing. And so it's sort of a little bit of an odd bird in that respect, but really was took every opportunity to be immersed in nature. It was also the era of when everyone was freaking out about the ozone layer, and Montreal was the place where the Montreal Protocol was signed to basically start to remove um, basically change refrigerants and blowing agents and styrofoam and so forth to help kind of mitigate the hole in the ozone layer. And thankfully the ozone, the hole is healing now, but when I was growing up, this was a really big topic, and certainly, was very much part of the conversation, both in my city as the convener of this issue, but also sort of in my family, where my father was very adamant about styrofoam and containers, and not using disposables, and I would get lectures about bringing home things like styrofoam containers or disposals and disposable. So this was very much kind of how I was brought up. And we were also, very much into, when organic food and vegetarianism was really not, not a predominant issue. A lot of people were eating a lot of packaged foods. I grew up sort of in an environment where we were growing food. We were part of a food co-op. My stepmother was a vegan. The rest of us were vegetarians. So really, it was sort of part of my upbringing, and things like pesticides and things back then that there was not so much awareness of. My parents were kind of at the forefront of that. And we convinced our landlord to have a compost on our balcony and all sorts of things that nobody else was doing at the time. So that was kind of happening in terms of how I was brought up. And at the same time, I was always really interested in architecture from a very young age. The other thing that my parents used to do is every weekend they would bring home the Sunday New York Times when it was, a big thick paper. I know it's gotten a little bit thinner, but I would always read the magazine section and the real estate and look at all the plans and the drawings and try to replicate them. And we were also, in my family, we built a lot of things. We made a lot of our own stuff, our own clothes, our own furniture. I built my own bed when I was 15. So, I was really into making things. And so that kind of marriage of drawing and making and being interested in space kind of led me to, pursue architecture. This is the School of Architecture at McGill University, where I spent 5 wonderful and challenging years of my life, 7 days a week, most of the time, as many of you know, and was had a pretty good time, I would say, burning the midnight oil like we all do, but was, as I was evolving and kind of getting to the end of my studies, was really questioning, when I was thinking about my thesis and questioning what was important to me, I was really struggling. And was very into making things and building things, and you know uh, really exploring, but was really sort of stuck on, well, what's my purpose as an architect? And so did my thesis project, and wasn't terribly successful in terms of really me having a lot of clarity in terms of where I was going and what my kind of core sort of interests were. And so, I left architecture school feeling quite, depleted and exhausted. And although most of my experience was good, I think I was sort of a little bit lost at the end and feeling like, okay, I've done all this, and where do I go now? And I almost left architecture at that point. But my advisor convinced me that I should continue. I got a job opportunity pretty quickly for a summer job, and he was just like, just take the job opportunity, see what happens, and you'll go from there. So, I started working as an architect, and just kind of with the attitude of I'm going to gain as much experience as I can, and I'll figure it out. I didn't exactly know where I was going, but I knew you know I enjoyed the practice of architecture. So I just figured, the first part of my career I was going to kind of learn. And when I graduated, I had this job for about 6 months, and it was in the late 90s. And in Canada at the time, or at least in Quebec, it was sort of there was a recession, and it was really hard to find a job as an architect. So I had that job. The architect was waiting for this big project to come through, and they didn't end up coming through. So I lost my job, and I started to look for alternatives, and I got a job working at the Canadian Centre for Architecture, which is an amazing institution. It's, if anybody doesn't know it, it's got an international collection. It's got amazing archives. I saw models by Le Corbusier. I saw 1700 or 1600 17th century architectural treatises, and so I got a job working in their education department, and got a chance to work with this woman, Phyllis Lambert, who I would say was in many ways a great inspiration for, um, you know, the rigor that she put on things, and sort of her interest in architecture, and sort of her way of approaching research, and so forth. She's also incredibly intimidating if anybody has come across her. So it was a terrific experience, and it made me look at things like from a critical lens. And then I started working, eventually came out of the recession and started working on residential projects, and uh, you know uh, office space, and commercial retail space, and then moved on to more institutional, more technical work, like healthcare. This is an endoscopic operating suite that I worked on, where in a hospital, where I learned a lot about mechanical systems. And I was sort of at that age where I was like, oh, I want to just do design, and got put on this project and was a little bit frustrated, but in retrospect learned so much about things that would be valuable to me in my career, in terms of design and construction, and how to work with contractors, and how to understand very complex systems. And then ended up leading a large extension project for a hospital in Montreal, which unfortunately didn't get built. So started to gather all this um, experience, and kind of came to a point about 8 or 9 years into my career where I was like, okay, I feel like I've gotten some well-rounded experience doing different types of projects, having different roles. What am I going to do next? Like, I still came back to that question of like, what's my purpose in architecture? And the last project, sorry for the resolution here on the screen, the last project I worked on, what before I left for New York, was this project in Montreal, for basically an environmental nonprofit. It was the first LEED Platinum building in Quebec. And it was basically, I guess, I don't know what the equivalent nonprofit would be in the US, basically like the Natural Resources Defense Council or some other very deeply environmentalist organization. That the head of that organization, at the time, is now the Minister of Environment for Canada. So he's, obviously was somebody who was a real pioneer. And so working on that project was really important for me. And it kind of brought me back to kind of my roots, or started to bring me back to like my upbringing, and kind of, I never made that connection between my upbringing and architecture before. And somehow it started to come together. And then, this is another, I just sort of want to bring up this theme of mentorship in my talk as well. This was my boss in Montreal, who was basically one of the partners at the firm I was working for before I left, who was also the partner in charge of this building. And, I want to mention that sort of I've had several women bosses, supervisors who have been really pushed me beyond where I thought I was and put me in charge of things that I didn't think I was ready for, and really just told me they had my back. So I want to really underlie the importance of mentorship, not just from women, but I had a lot of women leaders who supported me. So things started to come together, and this was in about 2006. And I sort of had a really interesting experience. I had gone to San Francisco to this fabulous bookstore, this architecture bookstore in San Francisco, and was just kind of browsing around on holiday there, and went up to, like, on a ladder to the sort of top shelf, just poking around in the store, and came across this book called the Sustainable Architecture White Papers. This was in 2006 or 7. And it was like this light bulb went off. I was like, oh, okay, this is it. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And I just saw that book, and from there everything just kind of precipitated, and I decided I was going to move to New York, and because things weren't just happening quickly enough in Montreal. And I saw this posting on our, I can't remember what the website was, but there was a website. I saw this posting for this manager of sustainability, and I didn't apply. I was like, I'm not qualified for this job because I haven't worked on 10 years of large scale mixed use projects with a focus on sustainable design. So I didn't apply for the job. And then I ended up, through circuitous ways, through the executive search, the recruiter, interviewing for this position, and she's just like, go anyway. And I got the job. And I didn't really have any major qualifications, but what I realized is that all the things I grew up with just kind of came naturally when I went for the interview. It was like I just knew what to do. I knew what the right strategies were. It sort of had been baked into me from my parents, even though they weren't architects. And I just kind of, it just felt like the right fit. And so that was, I was hired by this wonderful man, Bruce Fowle. Some of you might know him. He's retired, but he was the founder of FX Collaborative, which was Fox and Fowle, which, they built the first, what was coined at the time, the first green skyscraper, which was kind of the basis for the LEED rating system. So they were kind of a founding firm for the US Green Building Council. And Bruce hired me, like, right off the bat. Like, I interviewed with him, and we had a really long conversation, and I basically told him I wasn't qualified, and he still hired me. So, like, it was clear to me that what was really driving me getting that position was the fact that I really, really cared about the environment, and I had very strong values. And that's what really propelled me into a moment of where I had a more success in my career than all the years previous, where I was kind of like finding my way, and I didn't necessarily have a clear direction. And so that platform of working as what was initially manager of sustainability and then director of sustainability uh, enabled me to have influence on multiple levels, and really demonstrate leadership with the support of my firm, who was also very much aligned with these values. They were one of the first firms to hire a sustainability leader. There weren't that many back, I guess this is about 15 years ago. So, I had the support of my firm, and Bruce was very much a mentor to me as well. So influence happened to me in many ways. The firm was very supportive of things like competitions. This was a competition that we won several awards for when I was at FX Collaborative, for basically an expansion of a new neighborhood in Copenhagen, that was basically built on an industrial wasteland, where we proposed a really regenerative design approach that looked at restoring contaminated lands, but really thinking about public transportation, bicycles, energy systems that are benefiting from basically the seawater, growing food, and so forth. So we really had this amazing sort of set of ideas that came together. So everything from sort of the conceptual level to, implementing, amazing initiatives in New York City, like the Javits Green Roofs, which, is also not only one of the largest green roofs, but also, I was able to develop a research partnership with Drexel University, who is looking at all sorts of impacts of the green roof, such as, how is it helping with stormwater runoff? How is it looking, reducing the heat island effect? Like, so they're actually doing monitoring on the roof. And then the Audubon Society that's looking at, how is the roof contributing to, wildlife? Are there more birds who are nesting here? Are there other, kind of biodiversity benefits? So, so sort of more concrete impacts from a project perspective, and then, working on very innovative, projects. LEED Platinum, this is a Boston Properties project where they put in, you can't really see the wind turbines here, but, renewable energy, both on the roof for solar and wind turbines, but like extremely efficient energy systems and, metering systems and so forth for basically a spec office building. So really a range of projects, but also influence in terms of the firm's culture. So, we had a composting program where we had people in the office basically going up to the roof, composting. We had, basically instituting a culture of reducing waste and educating ourselves. And so there was a lot of work in terms of not only influencing on projects, but influencing my colleagues and peers to kind of embed sustainability in their own ethos, which I think is really important for success. I think there's a lot of folks that talk about sustainability in the environment, and it's obviously very much de rigueur right now, and everybody's looking for a sustainability expertise in their companies these days. But I think really embedding it in the way that you live is really key to driving it forward on projects. And then I think the other aspect of leadership that's really critical, and I would encourage everybody to find ways to do this, is to get, I'm not necessarily promoting AIA specifically, but is to get involved beyond the project and beyond your firm, because I think there are lots of ways, whether it's sustainability, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's, another specific, whether it's equity, another specific issue or topic that you care about that relates to the profession or to the built environment. There is tremendous impact you can have when you're involved on a task force, on a committee, or as a subject matter expert. So AIA is one example. I was on several task forces, as mentioned before, but it was kind of amazing that sometimes I would be trying very, very hard with a client to try to get them to do something beyond code or beyond their requirements. And it would be a very, very difficult battle. But then when I was on these task forces that were convened by the city, I would just say something, or I'd make a comment, and it would be supported by a few other people. And then the following year, I would see something translated into like a city policy that got passed by city council. And then all of a sudden, people have to comply with that policy. So there's a tremendous ability as a subject matter expert to influence more broadly. And so, we should be thinking not only about our projects, but how, as architects, we can lead in the sort of policy realm. And so, this was kind of just a short summary of my trajectory, and just to kind of sort of take you where I went next. I decided to, after 10 years at FX, go back to school, because I felt like I had kind of come to sustainability from my upbringing, but I had never really studied it, kind of sort of formally. So I decided to go back to school and take a mid-career sabbatical and learn more about climate adaptation and resilience. So I took a break and was gone for a few years, and the pandemic happened. And I came back and I decided to join an engineering company. So it's slightly different pathway. And part of that reason is, from my perspective and the work that I do, I felt that um, I needed to, in order to have adequate impact, I needed to be supported by more technical expertise in various aspects of climate and sustainability, and that an engineering company, specifically Arup, would be able to provide me that support in order to kind of affect greater change. But I would say, kind of in conclusion, that um, you know, I think that there's leadership is about, how you can have an impact, but ultimately, in terms of climate and sustainability, um, it's really, really important. I think the most important thing for me is to basically cultivate other people, whether it's my colleagues or others in the profession or clients, to really, one of the most inspiring things that happened to me in my, in my career is when I was very involved in Passive House, and I was giving a lot of talks in my previous company on Passive House, and one of my colleagues, who is not necessarily focused on sustainability, um, he just said, "Yeah, I put that in our proposal, that we're going to do it, and that we have to do it." And I told the client we have to do it, and I was floored. I was like, okay, because I wouldn't be able to have, the bandwidth to support, influencing every single project. And so for me, that's the greatest impact that I can have, and I feel is really important for leadership, is to empower others so that they can lead. And so I sort of leave you with my I call it 50 Shades of Green slide, which really is about the fact that, and this is sort of my this is more my pitch to everybody, that sustainability is something where everybody can have an impact, and I can have my small impact, and other people can have their impact, and they can they can focus on a particular topic area that they're interested in, whether it's Passive House or whether it's green roofs or whether it's embodied carbon or what have you, but that we really kind of need to all work together to kind of create a landscape where we can really solve these climate problems. So for me, cultivation is probably the most powerful leadership sort of action that I would take. So I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer questions, but just wanted to share a little bit about how I connected my values with my work, and how that's really empowered me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ilana. That's
If you
amazing.
write a book, I think 50 Shades of Green has to be the title.
That's a great idea. So happy to take any questions.
Well, we'll
Well,
just jump into the presentation by in
Oh,
first.
I'm sorry. Okay,
Well,
we're going to
that's
do
okay.
questions after. Thank you.
Yeah, because I have a whole list of them myself, and also if any of you joined us in the middle of Ilana's presentation, don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat, because we'll get to them too while we're listening to our speaker stories and most informative information. Cho and I were on a bus together about 15 years ago for our continuing education credits. We went to visit, not together, but we decided to go to the Armstrong ceiling tile factory tour. And I have to say it was one of the best CE credit 2 days that I ever had, and I ended up sitting next to and we were both kind of at the beginning of founding our own firms. With her husband Timothy Shields, who wasn't on the bus at that time. I haven't met him ever, but myself as a young chicken, also with a firm about 5 years old, and was just so full of life and humor, we laughed a lot, we told a lot of stories, and it was a very memorable bus tour trip. And we haven't seen each other much since then, but I've sent her a end of year greeting card every year. And, we just reconnected back this year with Nancy, who is helping her launch her initiative to educate elementary, middle school, and high school students in sustainability. Apart from having her own practice and doing amazing work with sustainability, and she's also a certified passive house designer, having worked on hundreds of buildings, whether they were single family or multifamily or more or larger. She's also a big advocate for educating young people into having the mindset and the tools to deliver sustainable solutions. And in fact, she's right now between May 1st and May, 9th, engaged with Pratt Institute on an icebox challenge, as you may have seen in our newsletter, which is to ask students to wrap some ice into a container and then let it sit for 8 days and see whose ice is the most solid at the end of it. So she's right in the middle of that. So we're really grateful that you are with us tonight, because I know you're busy doing so many things. And Kai, her daughter, 19-year-old daughter, is also with us tonight on the train from McGill University, making her way home. So greetings, everyone, and in show.
Yeah, thank you, Anik. I really appreciate that. And I have to say that that bus ride that we took together, you just made it so much fun. We were just like two peas in a pod, right? It really was quite memorable. And I really appreciated the fact that we stayed in touch, all 100% because of you. All those yearly Christmas cards, I never knew how you were so wonderfully consistent about it, but I really, really, really appreciated it. So let me begin by doing a quick screen share to mine, and then we can get started. Hold on one second. Let me make sure I do this correctly. So let me know if I haven't done it correctly, and let me find my actual slides, which would be great. Okay, so can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah.
It's moving. All right, good. Thank you so much for that. So yes, I mean, really, Ilana, thank you so much for your presentation. There was so much resonance between everything you said, and I kept nodding my head like, but in general, everyone, I'm really thrilled to be here with all of you and with Ilana having done her amazing presentation. And before I begin, I'd really like to thank the Mentorship for Women in Architecture program founders, Anik Pearson, Nancy Clappel, and Angelique Pierre, for all of your incredible work and dedication to supporting women in our field of architecture. I think this is really quite profound what all three of you are doing. So thank you so much for that. So to begin, I actually like to introduce you to my parents. This is a photo of them on their wedding day in Korea. And my mother was enamored with my father's charm, his insatiable curiosity, and his incredible love for adventure. And he never, ever worried about what the outcome would be. And my father was captivated by my mother's optimism and her remarkable compassion for others. And even living through 3 wars and the challenges of poverty and starvation in Korea during this time, she never, ever lost her faith in humanity or her ability to see the best in everyone. And definitely, these qualities certainly had an impact on me growing up, and even more directly informed my path to being the sustainability architect and educator that I practice today. So my first profound experience with architecture and its impact on our well-being occurred when my father, fueled by his adventurous and curious spirit, decided that our entire family of 9 would move to America. And so he left on his own for the US in the late 60s. He worked for several years by himself, ended up purchasing a relatively small, about 1,700 square foot house in Queens, in New York, and brought the rest of us with our mother in the summer of 1973. So as a 6-year-old wearing this custom-made floral outfit with a knitted shawl made by my aunt and with my violin in tow, we flew on a Boeing 747 double-decker from Seoul, Korea, super excited to explore what so many people, including my father at the time, described as the land of opportunities. I recall seeing topiaries in the front gardens of these suburban homes, which was absolutely new to me, hadn't seen them before. And upon arriving in our new house in America, I was a bit shocked by the architectural differences between what I had just left behind in Korea and where I was going to start my new life. And I have to admit, I was quite disappointed to find out that our new house lacked the spaciousness and the indoor-outdoor connection of our custom-built home in Korea that had this like very similar feel to what you see in this photo. And instead, our new home had these really small windows, and just the overall design really felt cramped. And I literally thought I was in a bird cage. And I was sad, really sad to leave our home and really began my first day in this land of opportunity, questioning whether this life in America would be better for us. And this was the unconscious seed that was planted for my future architectural work. Until today, I have an obsession with indoor-outdoor connections and really, the power of our work to heal what I call sick spaces. And so some of the experiences that I encountered as an immigrant really helped inform the way I navigated through my 3-decade-plus architectural career. So first, like growing up as an immigrant in Queens in the late 1970s, I didn't grow up in Flushing. I grew up in a neighborhood where I was literally the only Asian kid in my schools and experienced stereotyping. Now, my mother's compassion really, really helped me understand and empathize with my peers and their struggles to accept me. So even if their attempts were sometimes not so productive. So, they're thinking to themselves, who is this foreign kid that looks so different from them with a first name that was an English preposition and couldn't speak a word of English? And I don't know why, but for some reason, I understood their point of view, which really helped me to not get drowned in any kind of negativity. And in architecture, I found that this compassion to be an essential part of the design process, as well as the past prevailing cultures that I hear about. So, we really, all of us approach our work with a lot of empathy for the people who will be using our buildings, as well as in the natural environment around us. We consider how our designs will impact the health and well-being of those who inhabit them, as well as the ecological systems that may sustain life on this planet. So this meant really prioritizing human health and well-being while designing beautiful, functional, nurturing, and life-giving buildings. And sometimes, as females architects, sometimes we experience gender stereotyping, racial stereotyping, and I have experienced myself walking into a job site with a male counterpart. And, we all know what sometimes the typical assumptions may be for that. And, mainly because that had been the more traditional type. But, once we begin our conversations, immediately there's a shift in their perspective and everything moves forward constructively. And thank goodness for that. Now, I think there's a shift in that perception. So that's fantastic. And then in high school, I suddenly found myself surrounded by many Asians and was stereotyped as being innately smart. However, I was a different minority, this time as the rare Asian kid who was a truant, who often cut classes, never did the work. And so finally, feeling like I was going to fail high school through deep reflection and honesty, and despite my teacher's warnings that I'd be a total failure in life, I managed to graduate and move on to college. And for me, college meant really choosing what interested me and not just for what would secure a job. Despite my immigrant parents' worries, with the help of a lot of self-reflection and honesty, I ended up pursuing foreign languages and really got to appreciate the translation of ideas into different cultural word representations. And this really played out well as an architect, where we're always having to translate our clients' needs into spatial manifestations. So self-reflection has also been a true foundation of my work in sustainable building design. I examine my own beliefs, biases, and assumptions about what constitutes a good design. I questioned whether these align with the principles of sustainability. I asked myself how our buildings impact the environment and the people who use them. And so this process, sometimes can be a little challenging, because it requires for me to confront my own privileges and how my work may perpetuate some systematic inequities. But by engaging in self-reflection, I am much more conscious of my impact in creating more inclusive and sustainable designs as best I can. After graduating with a degree in French literature, Italian minor, and Latin, I took on odd jobs while searching for my true calling. So I took a career test at that time, and it suggested that I should work with my hands. And I don't know why, but the first thing that I thought to my naive, 22-year-old mind was that I didn't want to be a plumber. But of course, now as an architect, I have the most tremendous respect for their work. But of course, at that time, that didn't seem to be the case. And so I reflected on what made me the happiest as a child when I was less aware of these external pressures about what I was supposed to do. And I really, really wanted to make sure that the next step that I took was going to be purely from some sort of an internal compass that ended up coming up with two things. One was, first was caring for injured animals, and second was building models and making things. So despite my high school truancy period, I loved my classes in metal shop, woodwork, foundry, and even making nuts and bolts from scratch. So this led me to consider two paths for what it was to become my career education. One was veterinary medicine for healing, and then back to exploring architecture for making things with my hands. And of course, my peers questioned my direction. They thought I was crazy, but true to my father's spirit in terms of curiosity and really driving forward with an open heart. And you all know where this change in direction took me today. In general, though, maintaining an open heart was really crucial in delving into sustainable architectural design for me, taking leaps of curiosity and wonder, opening myself to new ideas and perspectives, and really being willing to challenge conventional ideas in order to create sustainable designs. So this required me to cultivate a deep sense of humility and gratitude for the privilege of being able to work in this field and the willingness to use my skills and expertise to serve a greater good. And although I went into architecture, my interest in veterinary medicine to heal injured animals translated into my architectural love for transforming people's lives through the healing of their spaces. So my passion for what I termed healing sick spaces led me to broaden my focus to address the problems caused by the global climate crisis at a planetary level. And so with the awareness that our built environment is globally responsible for 40% of the carbon emissions that cause climate change, and in densely populated cities like New York, this number is an astounding 70%. So the urgency of the situation compelled me to take action and do it as quickly as possible. According to the United Nations recent projections, to preserve a livable climate, greenhouse gas emissions must be reduced to net zero by 2050. By changing our reliance on fossil fuels and developing new technologies, we do have a chance to solve our climate emergency and build a sustainable world. So for over 20 years, our architecture practice Chocho Studio has focused on social and environmental sustainability, applying passive house principles, and really appreciating its ability to drastically lower energy use while providing beautiful, comfortable, and healthy indoor spaces. But with each passive house building taking several years to complete, I wanted to find a way to have a greater reach much more quickly. And this led me to enter into the policy realm to help revise the New York City Energy Code to meet the goal of reducing 80% of carbon emissions by 2050. However, after having done this, I soon realized that policy changes alone would not be enough. Even with the best of intentions, compliance would be ineffective if industry members did not have the knowledge to know how to comply. And this realization propelled me further to focus on education and raising awareness around building sustainability for climate action. And so even more, if we want to address the interconnected environmental, economic, social problems, as well as health caused by a climate crisis, we would need to have a cultural shift. And to achieve this, I began teaching beyond the AEC industry, which I still continue to do, but really kept moving on to educating the general public in order to spread awareness even farther and wider, to empower everyone with this knowledge that sustainably designed buildings can help improve people's quality of life while actively supporting climate protection and having a wonderful space to live in. So this is what led me to form our climate education nonprofit, Passive House for Everyone, which teaches sustainable building science of passive house to everyone, and especially to the next generation who are our future industry leaders. And teaching a science topic in a way that maximizes engagement and relevance to all audiences and ages is a bit of a challenge. So with my background in foreign languages and a love for translation, I developed a strategy to teach it through the creative arts. And by interpreting building science concepts into another communication form, the ideas are internalized through the process of their creative explorations. So our goal is for everyone to carry these concepts for the rest of their lives. You know, just like the way everyone understands recycling. So here is an example of a high school student exploring one of the passive house principles of air sealing through his creative arts interpretation via his interest in music and song. And in this way, we hope for him to retain this knowledge forever.
What's up? My name is Jahai. I'm a senior at Boys and Girls High School, and I explored the principle of air sealing for the passive house.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Pull up for air sealing. I think the house needs healing. We gotta seal up all the airways, cause it's getting chilly. We got the foam spray, seal the cracks up without an apology. Now I spend less money for the HVAC and I improve the quality of the air. Air sealing, we gotta spray up the ceiling. We gotta seal up all the airways, cause it's getting chilly. We got the foam spray, seal the cracks up without an apology. Now I spend less money on my HVAC and I improve the quality of the air. I improve my 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 quality of the air.
Oh, sorry about that. Oops. This is where my technical prowess sucks. So basically, through our nonprofit, we've taught Passive House building science to industry professionals, kindergartners, high schoolers, college students, and it just keeps going on. So as Anik mentioned, one of our current creative educational endeavors is teaching Pratt architecture students about Passive House through hands-on, full-scale icebox challenge structures. It scientifically demonstrates the benefits of energy efficient buildings by comparing two ice-filled boxes for 1 week, in this case, because it's on a college schedule, to see which keeps out the heat better. So the results are revealed by the amount of ice remaining in each of the two structures, such as this one that you see, where on the right, it was the passive house structurally built and is virtually unchanged, whereas the conventional building standard is a little bit more than half melted. Now, the New York City Energy Code has been improved so much that we probably wouldn't get as drastic of a difference, but thankfully. So Pratt students first explore the passive house concepts through abstract, conceptual, creative explorations through collage. And then they also explore through spoken word poetry, as well as in body movement choreography. So here's a video of our students' conceptual exploration of the 5 Passive House principles through body in motion. So the first principle of air tightness is expressed in floating air molecules in the building, moving around and leaking out of the cracks in the building envelope corners, which is then sealed off to prevent a further air leakage. Second principle, robust continuous insulation, showcases not just a minimal layer of insulation in typical construction, but for a passive house, many layers of insulation. And importantly, continuous insulation as expressed in the full coverage of the person representing a building. Third principle, high performance windows and doors, shows how one layer allows thermal conduction to pass through windows. A second layer, typical of double pane windows, prevents thermal conduction better. And then a third layer of triple pane windows would best impede heat flow. Fourth principle, no thermal bridging, is expressed in the red scarf as the flow of heat going across the human body bridge via conduction, which is then interrupted by a thermal block. Fifth principle, balanced ventilation, provides a fresh filtered air supply with heat recovery from the exhaust air, allowing for highly energy efficient mechanical heating and cooling. So following their abstract, conceptual, creative explorations that instills the 5 passive house principles, they then move on to the standard architectural design, working in student pairs for the icebox structures and exploring them through various modes from drawings to models and more models. And then until they finally come up with one synthesis team design, which is then developed into the construction of the final design of the entire group. And then I'm going to share with you just one more video where this is a quick video of their half-scale mock-up to test out their detailing and modular assembly design in preparation for their full-scale construction. So the students design modularly as a way to easily transport and reuse their structures for learning purposes to other educational institutions. So in this way, they are actively helping to spread the word on Passive House sustainable design strategies and participating as industry leaders even before they graduate. Okay, oh, sorry. So after they constructed a full scale in the studio, and then they were brought all the modules to the site on the Pratt campus, putting it all together. And then just this past Monday, the 1,000-pound ice block was installed into the structures and sitting out for 1 week. So the blocks are 20 inches wide by 20 inches long, and no, 40 inches long and 40 inches high. And on May 8th, we'll be revealing the results of the first ever US student design build rendition of the International Icebox Challenge. And I invite all of you to join us in this inaugural event taking place at the Pratt Institute Brooklyn campus. So, you know, it can be easy to get lost in the myriad of possibilities and specializations within our field. And, you know, as women in architecture with as many paths that we can choose, for me, I found that compassion, self-reflection, and open heart really can help provide a framework for defining our role as architects. And by embracing our unique strengths and values, we really can create a meaningful and impactful work that reflects our vision for the built environment. And we have the power to create a sustainable world for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, In. Thank you, Ilana. This was amazing. It's so inspiring to see your, your life's work in the flash. It happened in half an hour, right?
Yes.
We'll open up for questions and answers now. If any of you want to unmute yourselves and turn on your cameras, we'd love to start the conversation. I have lots of questions of my own, but I don't want to commandeer the whole evening. So please unmute yourselves and speak up. I'm sure you have questions.
And please turn your cameras on too.
Yes.
So I just want to make one comment about the work In and I are doing together, which is that the objective is to make the Passive House for Everyone curriculum available broadly, both in public schools and in universities. And to that effect, there's some curriculum development that's going to go on in the next couple of, I don't know, months or probably years. But a big part of that being successful is spreading the word and getting others to participate in carrying the message, because as dynamic and amazing as In and her program are, and Ilana too, for that matter, two women cannot take this beyond the places where two women can be. And so I guess a good place to start is to talk about how all of us are part of participating in making this go broad.
Well, one of the, yeah, and I will chime in, but we, for
silence.
example, yeah, there's one of the early Icebox Challenge creators was, it started in, I believe, if they weren't the original, they're definitely the second one. It was from in Belgium. And there's a Belgian diplomat from Washington, D.C., who just emailed me saying, I'm taking a day off on Monday, coming to New York City, and so that I'll attend the event and let's discuss about how we can scale this all over the country. So, it's definitely getting traction. People are really excited. It definitely is something that has to be scaled beyond our industry. And so hopefully, and I think the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, they're also coming as well, a member from there for the event. And Ilana, if you're in New York City, I better see you here on Monday.
I am taking the day off of Arab, and I do live in Brooklyn. It's like my day off to do errands. So maybe I will.
No
it's going to be
excuse
beautiful,
for you, lady.
and it's going to be a beautiful day. So
yeah, fingers crossed, right?
Well, that's what the
Yeah.
weather says so far.
Good, good.
Angelique and I are going to be there.
Awesome.
Yes, exactly. There you
Okay,
go.
well then.
So everyone, and I believe Talisha, she's gonna have a remark as the former Brooklyn AIA president. So there'll be a lot of fun people. Oh, and there's actually, I'll give you guys a preview because no one else knows about it, except that there's gonna be one of the early New York City bucket drummers.
Oh yeah.
Music, food, can't get any better than that.
But in a way, one woman can do a lot with the help of the community, right? And I think that you've both spoken about that. It's, your work, personal work, and your personal journey through your careers, but also all the people that you have met on your journey and how those connections have opened new doors and new possibilities, which is always great to hear. I think Nancy shared an article with us on the New York Times from last week, right, Nancy, about the importance of showing up to the office to be around your colleagues. And as those of you who are just graduating from school and facing a world where you think that you should have the opportunity to work from home always, just don't forget that, the opportunities that you have along the way in your journey, in your career of architecture, a lot of those opportunities come from people who have met you, who have worked alongside you, your colleagues, all your colleagues from anywhere, from a committee you've served on, from the seat next to you at your office. I can look back at my entire career and 99% of my work has come from recommendations by people that I've met along the way in my journey. So You know, and I think Ilana has also talked about being deliberate in your choices. That is a deliberate choice to make, to want to be present in person around people and work, learning from people, even if they're not your absolute seniors. They could be of your own age and they could still have some great influence on the path of your career. And I'd love to hear more about that from Ilana and In both, because
Yeah.
it seems like you guys just scratched the surface of those mentors that you've met along the way.
Well, it's just amazing, like, when you become part of a community, whether it's, the passive house community or the sustainability community or the affordable housing community or whatever your passion is, you become built into this network, and that is a very powerful force for affecting change. It's like birds all flying together. You don't, we all think we're individuals, really, but we are. When you look, In was talking about different animals, and you look at sort of how animals behave and how they can be in sync. Like there's a powerful force, and just to give you an example, like I decided to go back to school. I did a whole bunch of research when I was at school on climate resilience. I had all these connections I had made in New York through being on all these committees. One of those connections was Fiona Cousins, who is the chairman of the board at Arup in the Americas, who was leading their sustainability team. And I knew her. We'd written a paper together many years ago. I interviewed her as part of my research, and then she was like, "Oh, when are you coming back to New York? Do you want to?" I never dreamed I would be leading climate resilience at Arup. Like it's like crazy. To me, it's crazy. And so if I hadn't known her and had that relationship, I think it would have been really difficult for me to be in the position I'm in now. So there's so much value in taking that time. You appreciate we all have deadlines, we have things to get done, but in terms of your career trajectory, if you can pick one thing or one committee or one way to be outside of the boundaries of your office and also within your office, I agree that, building the relationships in person, is there's nothing more important than that, I would say. You obviously have to be good at what you do, but that's sort of like that's like the baseline, right? And then all of those, those networks and being in alignment with people and hearing what they have to say, and that's so important.
Yeah. No, you're so right. And, I mean, just building the connections and networks and, again, like just being open to meeting people and being open to just getting to know people and being open to just speaking up. I used to be very shy, and I keep telling my daughter, it's really, you could talk, just not to be afraid to fail, to make a fool of yourself. Just be who you are. And I can't believe, I mean, maybe it's because I'm in my 50s now, something shifts and you just don't care what people think about you anymore. And so I find that I say all kinds of silly things to everybody, literally. And it's weird because half the time I ask for something and I'm thinking, okay, I'll just ask. And then it happens. So, and I really do think that age makes a difference, for sure. So, but, even the fact that what we're doing here tonight, Anik and Nancy and Angelique, it's incredible that you're making this connection, with all of us. I mean, this is incredible. And this is what more and more needs to happen, which is really fantastic.
One kind of follow-up point to what In was just saying, every now and then in life, you get some feedback unexpectedly from someone unexpected that you never saw coming. And they tell you that something that you said or did that you don't even realize because you forgot about it long ago had some enormous impact or was incredibly memorable. And it's a pretty amazing feeling. Maybe I've had that happen 3 or 4 times. But my point in bringing it up is that all of you are equally capable of making something that happen to anybody else on this virtual meeting or anybody else walking on Earth, because it's so important to have the courage to just do what you're passionate about and put it out there. It has enormous ripples. Once the pebble falls in the water, the ripples just keep going out, and it doesn't really matter who it is it reaches. It just matters that it keeps going out there. Yeah. You never know. Go ahead.
No, it's so true. It is so true. I mean, even the fact that I'm teaching Passive House at Pratt, you know, someone asked me to teach a course there. It wasn't Passive House. They knew that I was doing Passive House. They said, "Oh, would you like to teach anything?" I said, "Sure, why not? I'll just teach Passive House." And then next thing you know, it blew up into this thing. And it was because, you know, speaking up is so important. Just speak up, and it's amazing what what happens to you when you speak up.
Mhm. Yeah, I would just add that, you know, when I was younger too, I was afraid that I wouldn't be well received. I thought that if I asked something or I spoke up, that people would be upset at me. But
Mhm.
as I get
Oh yeah.
older and I just take the chance, I realize there's an incredible amount of goodwill out there, and the response is almost always positive. It well outweighs the negative responses by miles. So yeah, you know, as you get older, you get more comfortable, but after you practice, you'll see the results of that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you may not see it right away, but it doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
Talisha, by all means, jump in. It's so good to see you. For those of you that don't know, Talisha is also a former mentor and presented this season. I see your hand is up, so by all means, jump into the conversation.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. So thank you very much, Ilana and In, for your wonderful presentations. It's always good, you know, to see these kinds of things, because then you get an idea of what other people are doing out here in the world. And I think that this program is great, the MWA, just because it just provides like so many interesting and you know, diverse perspectives about, you know, the profession on a whole. So thank you all for doing this as well as you do, because you do a good job. So I wanted to ask both Ilana and In, you know, because it seems like you were working at a time when sustainability wasn't really at top of mind, you know, uh, and how did you navigate through, you know, all of the pushback and, you know, all of the resistance or any of that stuff that you really, that I imagine that you received, and sort of make it out on this side of it? Like, how did you work through all of that?
Sure. Well, I'm still working through it because there's still a lot more to do, and I'm sure would agree. I think it's a great question because I think when I started, like I said, like I struggled a lot with my thesis because nobody was talking about sustainability, and like I had something unconsciously I was trying to connect, and like it took me like 8 more years to figure out what it was. So like even just naming it was difficult initially. And then like I think I put up that mountain bike in the woods image in my initial slide because I think two of the things that worked for me is like I kept moving. Like I kept moving to where there was a path rather than like trying to like plow a path. Like, you know, there was like a tree here, a roadblock here. And I just found like I tried to do it in Montreal. I remember talking to, even before I knew I was doing sustainability, I was back in the day, we were sending all these faxes to the contractors, you know, during construction. And there was so much paper being wasted. And I remember talking to one of the partners at one of the firms I work for, and I'm like, you know, we should be recycling. This is ridiculous. And he's like, well, it's confidential. And I did all this research on shredders, and then he still wouldn't buy it. And like I kept pushing. And then I just moved to another firm where like the woman who I showed in Montreal who with the white hair, she was like really into this. So I just moved there. And then finally I was like, okay, this isn't happening in Montreal as fast as I want it to. And Bloomberg had just published Plan YC. So I was like, I'm going to move to New York. And then, you know, and then finally, like, unfortunately, like I got to a point at my wonderful firm FX Collaborative where I was like, okay, I don't have the resources I need in this company. So I'm going to go to an engineering firm. So my solution was like, I'm going to keep moving so that I could do what I need to do. And, you know, if I'm not getting what I need, then I have to find my path. And it's maybe not a conventional path because no one's, you know, it's still emerging, right? And so that's been my solution.
That's thanks for that question, Talisha. As far as my end, I always say I don't wish my life on anyone because the way in which I got to do a lot of sustainability stuff is that I actually had to put in a lot more time, research, effort that, you know, just out of my own will, that I actually couldn't build a client, but I really wanted to do it. And so I would actually do tons of research, not bill for it, and find ways where it actually wouldn't cost more for the clients so that it really didn't become an impediment to their decision making, and then just convincing them that, you know what, this actually is not just, it's, you know, the thing about is people think, oh, sustainability, there's no design to it or whatnot. But, you know, when I could show them that it has no impact on design, but rather it helps them and it gives them more comfort and, you know, more luxurious setting, who wouldn't want a better setting, right? In comfort and design and whatnot. So that's kind of the way in which I was able to practice sustainability. Like, for example, I don't know, maybe it was 20 years ago, at least 20 years ago, when maybe it was longer, when, you know, bamboo, the use of bamboo was brand new. And I remember the contractor wanted to charge our clients triple for us using bamboo for the floor and millwork. And somehow we convinced him to try it out before, you know, so he tried out an area and then he realized that, you know, because he'd never used it before. So, you know, I'm sure you guys all experienced this, where often contractors, and rightfully so, if they are not familiar with the material, you know, they don't know what they're getting into. So of course, naturally, if I were a contractor, I'd have the same reaction as well. But he tried it out, turned out he loved it. It was so easy to use. He ended up using bamboo after that for all of his other projects. So, you know, I think part of it is just being persistent, but also I did have to put in a lot of work, including what I do now. You know, it's probably not great practice. And Anik, I really need your guidance, because I know that you teach at Cooper professional practice, and I probably do all the things that I shouldn't be doing. You know, not billing enough and whatnot, but that's always been kind of my thing, is like, once I have an idea that I want to do something, I'll do whatever it takes to make it happen, even if it's not high profit driven.
I think you're both doing a lot in that sense, that you're looking at the problem as a state of mind, as opposed to buy this pill and take this pill and that'll solve the problem. A lot of I didn't grow up in America, and my impression of America coming here from Europe was very similar to Inns. Like, houses are made like paper mache.
Yeah.
They're not made to last. They're made to be replaced in 10 years. You know, things are made to fail. And so going to my students with that, you know, let's really look at how we're building in America and see how we can change our state of mind so that we build more durably. That's already a huge, you know, let's not even talk about the waste we make when we're building. That's also
totally.
But to build more durably also is a huge, you know, buildings that last 100 years, 1,000 years are more sustainable than those that have to be replaced after, you know, a minute. So
no, absolutely.
I think you both have that state of mind in the way that you've approached your careers and your journeys in that aspect of your careers. You're not looking at it like, I'm just going to learn how to put a Band-Aid on something. You're learning how to really dig in and look at it in the big picture, in the way that you operate as well as the way that you design.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like inherent, like it's just sort of the way I was brought up. So it's hard to let go.
Oh,
of that.
Ilana, your connection is breaking up.
Oh,
It
can you
might
hear
be
me?
yours we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Oh, maybe
Can you hear me?
then.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to my 50 Shades of Green for a second to kind of add to Talisha's answer or to her question is sort of, with clients, my goal is like, I can't bring everybody to a net zero building, or I can't bring everybody. I want to take them one shade deeper or two shades deeper than where they are. So I always try to start with where they are and understand who they are. And my goal is like, okay, if I'm taking somebody, it's like going to the gym, right? Like you're not going to take somebody who's just starting out and expect that they're going to bench press 200 pounds, right? Like you have to kind of, get them comfortable. So I kind of take that approach of like, how do we bring them, to that next level? And then the other thing that I try to use, and I've worked with quite a few developers, is, try to understand their motivations and speak their language. So if they're concerned about like, paybacks, or if they're, the big thing for me is like, oh, what are my competitors doing? Oh, my competitor's doing that. Like, I want to be the best. I want to be the top. Like, how come they're doing this and I'm not doing this? Like, there's a tall passive house project that's like, so I try to play off of like what's driving the client and what's motivating them, and trying to align my values with their values, and try to find synergies. That's not always possible, but that's kind of, I've found that can be effective to some degree.
Yeah, no, that's a really excellent point. It really is very effective. As I talk about, compassion and empathy, it really is about that. And just and not just in architecture and for convincing clients, but just even in human interaction, is really putting ourselves in the other person's shoes and to really understand, what do they care about? Like, what is important to them? What is their priority? And especially in architecture with clients, it's their money, if it's a house, it's their home. They're the ones who's going to live there. So if we really put ourselves in their position and think from their perspective, and how can we as architects help realize, their dream setting within their framework, I find that that's probably the best way in which they're much more open to receiving your ideas or my ideas. And I have to say that in over 30 years of architecture that I've practiced, I really haven't had, knock on wood, I'm knocking on wood right now, obstacles with our clients. And I really believe it's because of empathy and compassion. I just start all of my projects with what's important to them. And when I do designs, I literally do role modeling where I say, I'm them, I'm not me, based on me being them and what they've just told me what they want. What's the best way to do this design for them? And it's always been somehow very effective. And so I've really haven't had a lot of obstacles in 30 years. I mean, so yeah, empathy for me has been incredibly powerful. Of course, now that I've said that, I'm probably going to have all kinds of obstacles because I've just jinxed myself.
No,
But
you haven't. You knocked on wood. That's the whole point.
Yeah, I just knocked on wood. So, but yeah. I think that really helps.
Yeah. I think that you touched on a very important point, which is empathy, and I think that it makes us all better at our profession, because we're in a service profession, right? And if you don't have that sort of empathy, putting yourself in their shoes, and as Ilana described, meeting people where they are, then you have a pretty bad service record, or you'll get a pretty bad service record, right? Because if you're always thinking about yourself, then what's the point?
So I think the next step after you meet people where they are is to educate clients in a subtle way to participate in the design conversation.
Totally.
Almost on par with the designer. And part of that is teaching them language and teaching them some design thinking, but in an open-hearted way, so that they can really participate in the enjoyment of designing something, whether it's a private home client or a large institutional building client. So much of the time, architects can treat a client like they're the expert and the client is paying the bill, but they're not really participating. Exactly. And I think that the the entire process is so much more interesting, productive, enjoyable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when you upskill the client to participate in it as your peer.
Mhm.
And I think that that's a wonderful thing to embrace early on in a career, every step of the way.
And that really is the creative process. You know, it's not the creativity in abstraction, but the creativity of how do you interpret this need into the most beautiful thing, that beautiful and functional together, you know, and to realize that. Because, you know, I always say, if I only design what I thought was beautiful in my own parameters, I find myself very bored, you know, just boring, because it'd be the same design all the time. What makes it interesting is that every client has their own unique personalities, and how do we work with them, collaborate with their aesthetics or their perspective or their cultural framework, and how do we interpret that into, you know, into something using our incredible creative minds, right? Trained as architects. And, you know, the work of what Anik does is, you do such amazing work. And I'm sure that you have a lot of, you know, input from your clients, as well as giving them guidance to the design directions to create your amazing projects, you know? So it's creativity is just, is everywhere, thinking outside the box. You know, that's the beauty of what we do.
Anik, I think you're muted.
Someone said recently to us, I don't know if it was in a seminar or something, but maybe it was Suchi. She was saying it was you know, when you respond to your client, and every project is different because you're empathizing with your client and doing something different. Your portfolio is full of wild, you know, things that don't look consistent, but to us, it is our body of work.
Right.
As opposed to someone who's just doing the same thing over and over, which is very calming to some clients, when they can they can look at a portfolio and see, this is what it's about. I'm hiring this person because they can do this 100 times. So it's like, even though our work, it looks schizophrenic because we're doing work for, you know, that purpose or that purpose or this purpose or this cultural shift or these people. And every project is so different. The portfolio looks very inconsistent, but actually that is the consistent part, is that we're always listening.
Exactly. And to that point, you know, like I remember when we first had our practice, and I had my daughter, I wanted to have a live work environment because I really, really wanted to raise her myself. And, you know, someone said to me, well, you know, that's not very professional. No one's going to think you're professional enough. And I said, you know what? Actually, there's so many different kinds of clients. And, you know, if they think this is weird, then they can easily find another great architect who has a wonderful whatever, and that's great. So I feel like there's plenty of work and plenty of architects to fit all kinds of models, you know. So I feel like there's no worry in that sense, you know. And so therefore, like Anik, for you, it's like, yeah, having different personalities. There are a lot of clients who embrace that, who enjoy that, right? That different personality of styles. And then you'll get those kind of clients. And then, you know, the other kind of clients will go to some other architect. And there's plenty of work for everybody in that regard, you know.
Oh, very true. I have a question for those of you who are joining us tonight. I see some familiar faces and some familiar names, but I can't quite place whether most of you are entering the profession of architecture, or are you in your mid-careers and looking for inspiration. I think some of you said that in your notes of what you're trying to get out of the seminar. We'd love to hear from you if you have specific questions about, you know, if you're entering your career and you're wondering how to get started. I mean, Ilana and In have spoken a bit about that, and I'm sure they would have great advice for you, you know, looking back on their 30 years that they've just explained to us. Or, you know, if you're in your mid-career and you're looking to pivot, also, that's a very good place to be, to ask Ilana, who's just done that. You know, her goal has always been the same, but she's gone from place to place and deliberately chosen different places and found her path that way. So we'd love to hear how we can help you.
Yeah, and if you're mid-career and thinking of starting a purpose-driven firm, I'm sure In can speak to that and how you got started, yeah, building out a firm based off of what your interests are. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Or even just injecting a little bit more purpose into what you're currently doing.
Exactly.
And if anybody doesn't feel comfortable in this forum, feel free to reach out to us individually, of course, as well.
So it looks like Melissa has a question.
Melissa, jump in.
Hi there. Thank
Hi.
you so much.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, I've attended several of these and I always find them to be super helpful and inspiring.
That's great.
I don't really know how to classify myself, if I'm a newbie or if I'm mid-career or what I am. I worked as a licensed clinical social worker for 20 years before burning out to a frizzled piece of charred wood, and decided to step away. And actually, while I was still practicing in traditional social work, I was taking architecture classes at night at the community college, because I found that it really fed my soul, and I felt like that's maybe what I should have done initially anyway. And so after I stepped away from social work, I finished out an interior design degree and an architecture degree at the community college because it fit into my life and my parenting and things like that. And so I've been working for about 8 years. I do only residential work. I'm super passionate about Passive House, and am focusing more and more on that now, and love my clients. I find that the clients who are drawn to that are my kind of people. And so I'm always happy working with my clients. I guess my big question is, I've had an inkling and a curiosity around, should I go back to school? Should I become a real architect? Should I become licensed at this point in my life? Or should I just keep like pursuing the Passive House stuff and becoming certified in other, like pursuing a slightly less traditional education like I have been?
Yeah, that's a great question. And
I'll add, I'm 51, so
okay,
I'm not,
yeah, I was going to ask how many
I'm
years
not
into your career.
25.
Yeah.
Yet I still feel like in a lot of ways, I'm at this point where I need to make a decision because I could still benefit from school, or maybe I don't need school.
So I will talk from like a maybe one angle. So there's school, and then there's actually becoming an architect and getting licensed. And I think that obviously there's a lot of time associated with, well, there's time associated with school, and there's time associated with getting, taking all your NCARBs, getting licensed, doing continuing education. And then, one of the things that happened to me is, when I was still kind of practicing before I got my license, I was doing contracts, on the side and things like that. I didn't have to worry about liability because I wasn't licensed yet. And as soon as I got my license, I stopped doing stuff on the side, because then I had to take out insurance for 5 years to do a kitchen renovation or small projects, right? For anything I did. And so I would, weigh there's kind of the legal and liability obligations associated with becoming licensed, which might be okay or not okay, depending on like how much you're generating in terms of income and clients. But then you have all these responsibilities. Someone's got to verify your practice. You have all this accountability to, depending on, if you're licensed in Oregon, there's different requirements at different places. So there's all of that that's associated with it and the responsibilities. So I would just weigh that as a consideration. But I think that there's always opportunity to like take classes or, become a better designer or whatever you want to call yourself, or technically. So that would be my opinion, is just think very carefully about the licensing piece at this point in your career and the responsibilities associated with it.
Yeah, and to add to that, Melissa, I have a question for you. Do you feel like what you're doing right now, right? Everything that you're doing architecturally, design related. I mean, do you feel like you're doing what you want to do? Or do you feel like you're not, there's something that you want to do that you can't do right now?
For the most part, I do feel like I'm doing what I want to do. I love, I work for myself right now, and the thing that I love is being able to choose my clients. And the clients typically are folks who have some, I would call them social worky needs, mixed with architectural needs, and that is my favorite kind of person.
That's great.
I love the marriage counseling part of it, and I love the like, how can we adapt the house part of it? And not everybody loves that kind of client, but
Right.
like that is the juicy good stuff for me.
Good.
But as my kids are, the youngest one is a couple of years from graduating from high school, and I do see that maybe there's some more flexibility to do what I want to do instead of having to always think about the parenting thing first. And maybe there's some like affordable housing or some humanitarian types of design that I would like to do that just don't work with my family life right now. So that's, I'm trying to do a little bit of future planning, I guess is what I'm
Understood.
trying to say. And
So you want to go beyond the like single family home or renovations or that type
or
of
to
work.
keep it as an option to
Okay.
explore that.
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously still get additional education and work for somebody who's doing that type of work. But yes, if you certainly want to do larger scale work and stamp drawings and things like that, then you'll, you know, that would definitely be necessary unless you partner with somebody.
Exactly. I mean, and I think collaboration is a really big word here. You know, in architecture, even if you're licensed, collaboration is everything. You know, we don't work in isolation. We work in teams all the time. The sub-consultant, engineer, mechanical, structural, you name it, right? So perhaps, you know, that's another way to go. I know that I depend on so many people, you know, to help me make things happen. And so, you know, put that into your bag of ingredients that maybe you don't necessarily, you may or may want to go to school, but it should be something because you want to do. And there's so many creative ways to achieve something, you know. So if you, for example, wanted to do a bigger project, perhaps there's a collaboration with a licensed architect who does that kind of work that you could partner with, you know. And this is where that thinking outside the box can help. And I literally tell my daughter, I was like, you know, as long as you're doing something proactive in life, you don't need to go to school. And I mean, you're talking to someone who went to school for 10 years, university level. I went to 3 universities. So, you know, for me to, I can say that because I'm not, but meaning that there's more than one way to achieve that same goal. So I would, you know, I think that kind of thinking would be good to just continue thinking outside the box, because you seem to be an outside the box thinker clearly, because you went from social work to right. Sure. So I would say keep using that power that you have in you to be creative in your thinking and figuring out how to reach your goals.
So I'd add one more thought to that, which is that you have to ask yourself why you're going to school. And in particular, the credential might be why some people go to school. But I know there are many famous architects who do not have an architectural credential. And there are many ways to go to school. And in particular, I think of the continuing ed program they run at the Harvard GSD in the summer, which is offered to allow people the opportunity to maintain their licensure. But it's also a great way to just learn without applying it to a credential. And I'm sure there are programs like that at architecture schools all over the country that would fit into your life. And I know that when I was about 50, I thought about perhaps going back to school myself. And I decided ultimately not to, because it was an amount of time and an amount of money that at that moment in my career was going to take 3 or 4 years out of my career and a big chunk of money. And given how much longer I wanted to be working, it just wasn't worth it, amortized over another 15 or 20 years. So think about not just if you want to go back to school, but like Ilana and In have already said, what you want to go back to school for, what you want to get out of it, and whether or not you need a traditional program where maybe some continuing ed or similar courses that teach you particular skills without necessarily buying or achieving a credential.
Mhm.
Because I'm sure you have credentials already.
And I'll just kind of add to that. So that said, I went back to school at the age of 45 and gave up a partnership. I was on a partnership track at my old firm, and I gave it up and went back to school with people half my age or close to half my age, because I wanted to understand like more about the subject matter. And it was an incredibly fruitful experience. I ended up getting all sorts of funding and grants. I did not pay a cent. I made money. I got published. I started a small practice during the pandemic after I graduated, before I came back to New York. I got clients that way. So there's a lot of value. There can be a lot of value in going back to school mid-career if you're doing it for the right reasons, right? So I wouldn't say, yeah, don't do it, but to Nancy's point, like it should be very deliberate as opposed to like fear-driven.
Indeed.
Awesome. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question?
So I don't really have a question,
Goodness.
but I can just sort of share. So I'm Anna Seidman. I kind of just came to this because of In needed some help with tech support.
Yeah, I tell you, I get help everywhere. Go ahead.
And I did think I was gonna drop off at some point, but this was a very interesting and engaging discussion. And it's given me a lot to think about as I'm only, I guess, 4 years out of school now. So it's more a lot of stuff that's going to be, I guess, down the road, since I'm still trying to gain a lot of experience. But it's very interesting to hear from both Ilana and Dan.
Thanks.
Just to commend you for working while you're in school. I think that's really what kind of propelled me once I graduated, having that experience that, you know, on my resume that I had some work experience put me well ahead of my peers upon graduation. So it's a great place to be. If any others are still in school, I know probably not too many, because it's like the end of the school year right now. They're probably at their desks.
I've actually graduated in 2019, so it's 4 years since I've been in
since
school.
Okay. Well, anyway, experience is another way to get education, right? So just like Ilana has said, going to a firm that has, you know, people willing to teach you and to teach you some new things and to apply it to something real also builds the foundation of a career and future opportunities.
Since we're all here, I'm going to put a former colleague and friend on the spot who can speak to her own experience kind of going back to school mid-career, coming from the construction side of the industry and now working in architecture after having completed her master's. Shannon, we'd love to hear from you. Any thoughts on, you know, career shifts and going back to school to learn more about the thing that you want to do next, and how it's kind of changed things now that you're in the workforce doing the thing that you want to be doing, that you set out to do?
I feel like that was a lot of questions. You know, I think that it's interesting. I think Ilana said, don't go back to school out of fear. And I actually, looking back, think that might have driven some of my reasons for going back to school. And school itself was not the most pleasant experience for me. Now, a lot of factors. I started in fall of 2020. The world was ending. It was, you know, I pretty much spent the whole first year online. There was very little community. So, things that drive me to be better weren't there. They weren't available. So that was tough. But I do think that it exposed me to, sort of new things. It put me on a path. I think opened options, and in the end, will be like a good thing for me. But just in terms of going back to school, and I so did the traditional 4-year undergrad right after, outside of high school, and was 35 when I started graduate school. So yeah, it's hard. I think what everyone else said about going back to school is really important. You have to examine your reasons for it, what you hope to get out of it. And then it doesn't really end, because now I'm supposed to be studying for exams and getting licensed, and that's time consuming and scary as well. So overall, I think I am on the right path, but it wasn't the easy one, and I'm not sure that like I would choose it again, at least not in exactly the same way. So.
Although, Shannon, you had a story to share with Angelique and I when we saw you in New York that I was thinking about while Ilana and In were talking about how the University of Georgia actually has a mentorship program where they connect students with architects in the industry, to kind of introduce them to each other and have a kind of like in a supervisor role. Is that right? So you can pair up with an experienced architect in the field as a role model supervisor, someone you could talk to and seek guidance from. And so tell us how that developed and how few of your classmates took advantage of it, but what it brought you.
Yeah. So I was at Georgia Tech, and the program, interestingly, was through the AIA Atlanta chapter. But they reached out to, there's two NAAB accredited universities here in Atlanta. And so I believe they were trying to get students from both universities associated with it. Georgia Tech's master's program had, I think, about 50 students per year on average, something around there. And there was about 7 or 8 of us that signed up for the mentorship program, which I was shocked by. I was like, free connections to people working, advice. It was supposed to be the whole year, sort of last year of your graduate program. And I was pretty good about meeting with my mentor. I think we both wanted to participate in it, but it did come down to the students or to the pair setting up the meetings. So it was also interesting that of the 7 or 8, I knew a couple people who only ended up meeting with their mentor like once or twice throughout the year. And I just don't think you can build the rapport. You can't get like intimate's not quite the right word, but you can't be vulnerable and ask the questions that might be really important when you're starting your career or sort of starting down a new path. I think until unless you're getting to know people over several occasions and that sort of thing. But it is a great program. Actually, I haven't heard, so I don't know, sort of what the students this year, if more were partaking, if still COVID had anything to do with sort of a small participation in it. I don't know, but I did get a lot out of it, including ended up working. I'm now at the firm where my mentor works. So there was a direct connection to getting my first job post-graduate school.
Right.
Well, I sort of wonder, in hearing that story, thanks for sharing that, Shannon, if it's not often a matter of sometimes when you don't know how something works, and I think that in her presentation talks about this, that if clients don't understand what something is, then you kind of have to educate them. And sometimes I've looked back on my own, experiences, like starting from school, and sometimes, like if you don't know how mentorship is actually supposed to work, which you'd be surprised how much people just don't know. I feel like I still am learning what mentorship is. And sometimes something like mentorship, I think that there are many people who might take it as, okay, you have somebody who's more gray haired than sort of telling you what to do and, sending you on your way, or, like maybe you don't think as a younger person, or as a student, that you're kind of in the lead on mentorship a lot of times, because a mentor can only do what you need them to do, right? Like in some ways. So I think that sometimes it's a matter of just not understanding how it's supposed to work. Like mentors are supposed to come to me. I'm not supposed to come to them. And they're supposed to say, like a fairy godparent, not non-gendered, to come and just sort of tap you and say, okay, you're going to be with me and I'm going to let you know what to do and how to be and things like that. So, maybe there's like for instance, in the program that you participated in, Shannon, like maybe there needs to be sort of like a primer for these students about how mentorship works, and what you should expect to get out of it, and that it's very individual because everybody needs something different, right? Like everybody needs some kind of care that's different than the other. So recognizing that sometimes a mentor that you've thought would be great for you is maybe not so great for you, in practice. So anyway, that's my 2 cents about it.
I'd like to add two different thoughts to that. So part of the issue, I think, is that oftentimes these mentor relationships are unstructured, and it takes some time to understand what the questions are that you even want to ask, or what it is that you want to be talking about with a mentor. But it also makes me think of how we get such powerful messages that careers are linear and they progress in a single direction and, at a steady pace, which is not true. And I think a career is more like a puzzle, and all of the pieces fit in a particular place, and they are all meaningful. And there are moments when you see the meaning of the pieces that at other moments you think, well, what did that have to do with anything? And I think that we need to shift the way we perceive these things and talk about them, to acknowledge the fact that we're not all proceeding along a straight line in a single direction. And that's fine, because there's lots of things in my own career that I know caused me a great deal of anxiety along the way, that I thought, oh, I've made this big left turn. I don't know how it's turning out. I don't know why I did that. What about the 2 years that I spent doing that? And recently I had an experience where I felt like everything kind of made sense. And, that doesn't mean that things make sense always and forever since that moment. But I do think that we each have a lot of different experiences that we bring to what we do, and all those experiences are valuable. We just don't always have a continuous story to tell about it that can make sense in 2 sentences, and it doesn't matter.
And like you said, Nancy, over the years, that maybe it's just having somebody there to listen to what you have to say, because that person just needs to express it out loud to somebody. So yeah. Being a sounding board, maybe, the mentor is not there to give something or to provide or to answer, but just to be there to listen. It's as simple as that. As you all are here, just listening in and getting your own ideas, even if you haven't asked a question specifically, just listening in and seeing, getting inspiration from others, and kind of getting a glimpse of your own things that excite you and bring you joy.
And I would say also that you know, we are in a pretty traditional profession, you know, the sort of like, this is what an architect does. And, you know, and I think about, you know, the sort of startup kind of culture of like in other industries or entrepreneurs or you know, people starting their own businesses and technology, and it's a very different model than our very traditional model. And so, you know, I was struggling with mentorship when I was trying to forge my kind of unique path, that, you know, maybe I wasn't going to become a partner in an architecture firm, and I was like, I can't find a mentor, because there's, you know, it's hard to find somebody who's, so I think we also have to open our minds to like, what is like who that mentor could be. You know, is it somebody who's doing something completely different, you know, in a different industry, who has pioneered something, you know, and maybe there's value in how they're thinking. Maybe they're not an architect. So it's kind of, I think the lesson, because I struggled for a long time trying to find somebody to mentor me. And then I sort of opened my mind to this, okay, I'm not going to find that person who's like me, so, or who's like me in 5 years. So I'm going to try to explore other avenues.
And even, you know, just in general, the idea of mentors, I mean, this is such an amazing platform, you know, where we're talking, listening, and there's just so many different experiences, which is so invaluable that I don't think I've ever had in my life ever. And all of my mentors, even in college, you know, when I took Latin, my mentor, the guidance counselor, told me I shouldn't take it because it's too hard and I wouldn't do well. And I thought, oh my God, like, how can you advise someone, you know, to not do it because it's hard? And then, of course, I didn't listen to her. You know, I was just like, no, I'm interested, I'm going to do it. And of course, it ended up being fine. So I think even with mentorship, it's kind of like, again, like that real deep self-reflection, to really be like true to yourself and say, okay, you know what, maybe I'm not getting as much help as I'd like to, but so let me just figure it out. Be not afraid to fail, because it means a lot to me. You know, those videos that you saw of all those creative explorations, when I first started that idea, I had fellow architects who told me that that was the dumbest idea. Then they said to me, why wouldn't you just teach it like normal? And I just had to go, well, because that's what I feel, you know? And so I just took the leap. So sometimes I can't emphasize enough. I mean, I know it sounds hokey, like self-reflection and empathy and compassion, but these truly are the tools that really help me to, you know, go against the tide of these kind of mainstream thinking and say, this feels right to me. And even though everyone else is telling me that it doesn't make sense, you know, I'm just going to try it anyway and be truly willing to fail. And this is what I tell all my students. I tell them, listen, I can only share with you my perspective, but the real goal is to have you guys think critically. If there's anything that our schools could give you, my teachings, it's giving you the tools to think critically, so that I will tell you whatever I share with you, but you don't necessarily have to agree with me. You know, just take whatever you like, what makes sense to you, and move on, you know, because, you know, as professors, we are considered mentors to all the students that we teach. And there's a danger to that. You know, I've had many experiences where professors didn't tell me the right things or things that I thought was healthy, and it turned out it wasn't. So, you know, I think there's a balance, you know, between like, it's so great that we have this platform, but at the end of the day, we need to rely on our own inner compass to say what makes sense for me, and not be afraid to really listen to yourself.
You know, I know it's 8:30 and we all have to go.
Oh,
and
God.
sorry it's taking so long. To me, it went by so fast. But when I was listening to and looking at those videos with your students, I thought, oh my gosh, it was just like the Armstrong ceiling tile factory tour that we took, where we went from a testing room where they tested the acoustic qualities of certain panels, and then they went into a room and all the scientists had white jackets, and there were 3 walls, and they put these acoustic tiles in different environments, one of a huge amount of chaotic noise. It was a reverberating chamber, and another one with extremely insulated room where no noise escaped. Do you
Right,
remember that?
right. You have a really good memory.
I'm having flashback visions to our Armstrong
I love
show.
it.
Anyway,
Well, as
That
we're
was great.
approaching the end of our time, I guess we have a minute left, but I have two things, if you may humor me. One, in the spirit of your mom's optimism I would love to hear from both you and Ilana, kind of working in your respective areas. I'm working with students, working on Passive House for Everyone, working at Pratt, and Ilana working on more of the infrastructure side of things now. What you guys are most optimistic about in terms of design, sustainability, environmentally responsible design, all of those things. And then we'll end with announcements briefly.
Do you want to go first?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm always going first, so I want to let you go first.
Oh, no. Okay.
Okay.
No,
Well, you don't
I'm
have
just,
to. I can go
yeah,
first.
yeah,
if you
go
like.
ahead. I love it. I
Okay.
love hearing you.
Okay. Well, I think, what am I most optimistic about? Okay, I am so inspired by, I sound like a grandma here, but I'm so inspired by all the young people that I work with who are way smarter than I am. Then they're so like, these whiz kids, like they're not all engineers, but there's a lot of engineers but other people, planners, like we hire lots of different kinds of people, and they are just brilliant, and they care so much about the environment, and they are so smart. And so just kind of talking about cultivation, like I sort of feel like I'm almost just sort of there to bring them work and just kind of make sure that they're, just steering them a little bit lightly, and I'm so optimistic about that, the younger generation that I work with. So in terms of helping to solve these problems and really getting it. So I'll say that.
Yeah, yeah, I have to agree with you. I mean, being at Pratt, dealing with and even kindergartners and high schoolers from, Bed-Stuy to Dalton High School, private, it's just the youth. They are passionate about addressing climate change and social inequities, and really just, trying to empower them with the tools to be able to address it in a very constructive way is incredibly inspiring. Every time I go to school, I'm having stress about work, and I get there and I see the incredible amount of creativity that goes on, and you see that there's hope. It's what's also inspiring is you guys, all of us, that we have, you're all thinking, you're all sharing, I mean, the fact that we're having this Zoom right now to be able to share this knowledge and experience, it really goes in both directions. And just the idea that we can make these connections that's really critical. So, I really have to, again, thank Anik and Angelique and Nancy for creating this kind of platform and having people like Talisha and Melissa and Shannon and Kim and, Anna, just all of us. I mean, all these different personalities. This is what makes our world super, super interesting. So I think that the diversity that we have, the different cultures, despite all kinds of, I forget, my husband always uses a term and I always forget, maybe Kai, you remember, he says it's the pessimism of the spirit, but optimism of the will. Right. That no matter how, things may seem bleak, that with our humanity and the spirit of optimism that we really can overcome. And that really inspires me. And I think that basically what we're doing today, this evening, is part of that optimism of the will. And that's truly inspiring. And that happens in all generations.
That's a wonderful place to end today.
All right.
Thank you.
Somebody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you,
Okay,
both,
thank you
Ilana.
all.
Thank you, In, for sharing with us. And I guess the one thing I'll leave you with is that June 7th, we do have a coaching session on confidence coming up with Ishwarya Rajamahan. So please, if you're interested in learning more about how to be more confident in your work, by all means, register on our website. And we do plan to gather all in person Again, it's been a long time since we've done that in September, so we'll have an actual in-person mixer, and we'd love to get all of our mentors and mentees in the same room. So with that, we leave you.
Yes, in New York
Alright.
City. So plan your trip if you haven't bought your tickets yet. It'll be Midtown Madison Avenue,
September
Woohoo!
21st.
All
September
right.
21st.
And we'll be putting some communications about that before too long.
Yeah, registration soon because we have to start counting heads.
Awesome. Okay.
Buy enough wine.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been
Thank
such a
you.
great
Safe
time.
travels,
Yeah.
Kai. I hope you get there not too late.
Yeah. Now I gotta go pick her up.
Okay. You're
See
almost
ya.
there. What, you're like an hour, 2 hours away, kind of 10 o'clock, or when does it come in? Something like that. So,
Yeah.
all
Thank
right.
All right. Take
Thanks,
care,
everybody.
everyone. Have
Nice
a
to
good
meet you all.
evening.
Good night, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.